Hello and welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm going to show you how to make an apple pie with a crumb top completely from scratch. There are several different parts to this process, so let's get started. First, starting off with the pie crust, we'll need 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Next up is half a teaspoon of salt, followed by 2 teaspoons of sugar. And that's it for the dry ingredients. Now we'll quickly whisk this for a couple seconds just to combine everything together. So we'll set this to the side for now, grab a cutting board, and 1 stick of cold unsalted butter. Now we're going to quickly cut this into cubes to make sure that the butter stays as cold as possible. Then we'll add it right into our dry mixture. And now we're going to combine everything together. You can use a pastry cutter if you have it, or just a fork. You'll want to avoid touching this with your hands directly just to make sure everything stays nice and cold. You should end up with the mixture looking like this. It's fine if you still have a few larger chunks of butter. Next, we'll need half a cup of ice cold water. We want everything as cold as possible because this is going to give us a nice crispy and flaky crust in the end. So now we'll grab our flour and butter mixture again, and we're going to slowly add in our ice cold water. Start off by pouring in a couple tablespoons and mix until all of the water is absorbed. Continue to repeat this process until you've used up all of your water, and the dough will look like it's finally starting to come together. The dough should look something like this, where there is almost no dry flour left in the bowl. Once you get to this point, you can quickly use your hands to bring the dough together into a ball. Again, we don't want the heat from our hands to warm up the dough too much. After this, we can grab some plastic wrap, tightly wrap up the dough, and leave it in the refrigerator overnight. Now it's time to move on to the next part of this process, which is the apple filling for the pie. For this recipe, you'll need 4 to 5 pounds of apples. For me, that was 6 medium to large size apples. And we'll of course have to start off by peeling all of them. Once that's done, we'll take them over to our cutting board and cut them up into either cubes or slices, whatever you prefer. Whatever you choose, make sure all your pieces are pretty similar in size so that they cook evenly later. This time I decided to cut them into cubes, which were about 1 inch. It doesn't have to be perfect, but pretty close. I like these bigger pieces because you can really taste the apple in the pie. Now that they're all cut up, I transfer them over to a bowl and add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. This adds a little tartness and prevents the apples from turning brown. Now I quickly toss them to cover them as much as I can with the lemon juice. And now we can move on to our next step. I have my deep pan on the stove and I'm going to preheat it to medium heat. After a minute or so, we'll add 1 to 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I did closer to 2. And now we're going to melt the butter and completely coat the bottom of the pan. Now we can add in all of our cut apples. Now the pan is pretty full. If you prefer, you can use a deeper pot just to make things a little bit easier when you're stirring. Now we're going to add a 1/4 cup of white sugar, followed by a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. You can add a little bit more of either sugar if you want a sweeter pie. Now I'm going to stir the sugar in a little bit. It was kind of a struggle with the size of the pan, but I tried to be careful. And over time, the apples will start to cook down, which will make it a little bit easier. So now we can add 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. You can also add a dash of nutmeg. This is optional, but I like nutmeg. Now we're going to continue to cook the apples over medium heat while stirring. During this time, you'll start to see the apples soften up and release their juices, which will lead to them shrinking a little bit in size. After a few minutes, the apples should be looking something like this. We're now going to have to thicken up all this liquid to finish our pie filling. We'll do this by taking 4 tablespoons of warm water and adding 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Now we'll take a spoon and start mixing until everything is completely combined, creating a slurry. Once it looks basically like milk, you can pour it into the apples. Now we're going to mix this into the apples and continue to cook while stirring. We'll do this for a few minutes until the sauce gets nice and thick around the apples. Once you see it start to thicken, you can lower the heat to low or turn it off completely and continue stirring. Once the liquid gets to the point that it starts to stick to the apples, that's when you'll know that you're done and you can remove the apples from the heat. The filling will need some time to cool, so we're going to set it to the side while we finish preparing the other parts of the pie. Now we can finish preparing the final component of our pie, which is the crumb topping. In the bowl, we're going to add 1 cup of all-purpose flour, followed by 1/3 of a cup of brown sugar, followed by half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Now grab a whisk and mix everything together. Make sure that you break up all those chunks of brown sugar. Now that all the dry ingredients are combined, we're going to grab 1 stick of cold, unsalted butter. Cut this up just like we did for the pie crust and add it into the flour mixture. But now, unlike the pie crust, we're going to mix everything together by hand. When the butter starts to combine with everything, it'll turn into a light brown doughy mixture. And once everything is combined together, you can pick it up and start making the crumbles. Keep doing this until you don't have any more very big chunks left. Once it's looking something like this, then you're ready to go. And now with the last component of the pie finally completed, we can preheat our oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit and start to assemble the pie. We'll start this off by covering a flat, clean surface with flour, and then grabbing our pie crust dough, which has been sitting in the refrigerator overnight. Now we can unwrap it, place it on the floured surface, put a little bit more flour on top, and then start rolling it out. So now I'm going to grab a rolling pin and roll out the dough until it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Also be sure to keep in mind the size of the pie dish that you're using. You want to make sure that your crust is big enough to fit inside the dish. In my case, I'm using a 10-inch pie dish. So now let me take you to the side to show you about how thick the crust should be. Once it's rolled out to the desired thickness, we're going to roll it up onto the rolling pin. If you put enough flour on your table or whatever other surface, this should be easy to do. Now we're going to grab our pie dish and roll the crust back on top. And now we can push the dough down onto the dish to make sure that it's filling up the entire thing. Once it's completely in there, we can grab a sharp knife and cut off all of the excess dough. So I'm going to go all along the outside edges just to make sure I'm not cutting off too much and there's enough crust to contain all of the filling. If you like, you can save the excess dough and make anything else that needs a crust. Our crust is finally ready to go. Now it's time to fill it. Now we can take our apple filling, which has cooled down some. It's not cold, but now we can put it into the crust. You'll actually be able to see some steam coming off of the filling. As long as you didn't just take it off of the fire, then you should be okay. I was able to fit all of this filling into the crust. Again, this is 6 somewhat large apples inside a 10-inch pie crust. Now we're going to make sure the filling is evenly spread out into the crust and get every last bit in there. Then we'll grab our crumb topping and put all the crumbs evenly on top of the pie. Make sure none of your crumbles are too big and they're spread out in a nice even layer on top of the filling. This is looking pretty good. Now it's ready to go into the oven. Now we're going to bake this for 30 minutes at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. Now let's take a look. Now this is looking really good. Everything is a nice golden brown color. We're going to let this sit to cool for at least an hour. You'll probably want to have some of this right now, but if you try to cut it, it's going to completely fall apart. So you're going to have to be a little patient. If you enjoyed this video or plan on trying this recipe, please like the video to save it for yourself in the future. If you're interested in getting some more recipes from me, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it if you do. Now that the pie is ready to go, we're going to top it with a little bit of ice cream. And now it's ready to eat. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. Let me know if you tried the recipe, and I'll see you again later.